Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Torah study for this week's portion, the portion of Vaychi. This is the last portion in the book of Genesis. Next week, we'll begin a new Torah portion in a new book, the book of Exodus, Shemot. In this week's portion, I want to share with you the following. First is, we read in this week's portion for the first time about a relationship between a grandfather to a grandson or a grandchild. There is a rabbi, I knew a rabbi, that anytime someone would be lucky enough to have a grandchild, he would say to him, "Congratulations, you have just entered the human club, the club of human beings." And the reason he would explain is caring for the young, for children, is a nature that exists with all animal kingdom. The eagle, the cow, they feed, they protect, the lioness, all animals protect their young. However, there is no relationship, at least we don't know of any relationship between grandparents and their children. You won't find a grandfather or grandmother in the animal kingdom who is protecting or looking after their grandchildren. Usually, after the children grow up, they go their way, and there is no more relationship between the father and mother and their children. The only exception to the rule is human being. Human beings still relate not just to their children, but to their grandchildren as well. Where do we find it? The first time we find it is in this week's portion. I'm going to point out in two places, and in that way, Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, is unique. We don't find that Abraham had any relationship with his grandchildren, even though Yaakov, his grandson, grew up in the same house and they lived together for over 60 years. I'm sorry, not Yaakov, Abraham. Abraham died when Yaakov turned bar mitzvah. But Yitzchak, no, I'm sorry. Yes, Abraham was alive until Yaakov turned bar mitzvah. For 13 years, he knew his grandchild. Yet we don't find any relationship between Abraham and Yaakov. Here by Jacob, it's the first one where the Yitzchak, by the way, also he was for 80 years. He lived in the house with grandchildren, Jacob's children and grandchildren. Yet we don't find any relationship. The only one that the first one we find is in this week's portion. We read right at the beginning of the portion, chapter 47 or 48. We read that Yosef, he hears Yosef hears that his father is sick. Then after these words, verse 1, chapter 48, then after these words, Yaakov, a messenger said to Yosef, "Be aware, your father is sick." He took his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, with him to Yaakov to bless them before he passed away. So we see that he is having a relationship. Later on, two pages later, still chapter 48, verse 11, Yaakov says the following, Israel, Yaakov said to Joseph, "I didn't even expect to see your face. And look, God has shown me your children too." And then Yosef is asking for a blessing, and Yaakov blesses his two grandchildren with the famous prayer, Amalach, the angel that always guarded me and protected me, should protect these children, and that they will be a source of blessings for the entire history of Jewish people. And that's why today, when a father blesses his children, if it is his sons, boys, he says to them, "Amalach hagoel oti," the same prayer Yaakov is saying for his grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe. If incidentally, if a father or a mother blesses their daughters, they say, "May God make you among the Jewish people like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah." In other words, there is a distinction the way parents bless their children, their sons, versus the one they, versus blessing their daughters. When blessing their sons, we compare them to Ephraim and Menashe, the grandchildren of Yaakov, as Yaakov said, "My blessing to you will be the blessing that all fathers bless their children." Wherein when it comes to daughters, we bless them that may they be like our foremothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, because they are the examples of the greatest Jewish women, and therefore they should be emulating their ways. Actually, we find in the Torah a relationship to our grandchildren earlier. However, we don't read the details. And this is about Laban, the Aramean. Laban, when he chases Yaakov, after Yaakov runs away with his wives and children, he turned to Yaakov, and the next day when they meet, he says, Abanim banai abanot bnotai ve'abanim banai. You children are my, you daughters are my, you sons are my. So he claimed ownership over the children, but there is no other relationship. One can ask, what's the responsibility of a grandfather to his grandchildren? Especially in our community, many of our community members are grandparents rather than parents raising children. That's a majority. When it comes to a father, the Torah, the Jewish law, dictates very clearly the obligation. The obligation is to circumcise the son, to redeem the son if he is a firstborn, and then we must teach them Torah. It's an obligation, the Torah tells us, to find them a wife, a spouse, to teach them a job, to take them to college or train them to be able to earn a living, and finally, according to many, also to teach them how to swim. And the reason is because those days they lived on riverbanks, they live near places where tsunamis or a high tide can come and wipe out the entire town. And in order for survival, they needed to learn how to swim. So we have four major obligations that every father is obligated and mother obligated for their children. One is to teach them a job to be able to make a living. The second is to find them a wife. The third is to teach them Torah. And the fourth one, according to many, also to learn them to teach them how to protect himself from danger. Some say it's teach them first aid. Some say teach them how to drive some properly. But in ancient time, it was to teach them how to swim. What happens to the grandparents? What obligation do grandparents have for the grandchildren? We know that they are must, and it is an absolute obligation to give them Hanukkah geld and to take them on a cruise. But aside from that, which is unquestionable, what is the Torah dictates that a grandfather must, and a grandmother as well, must do for their children. The following is a story that appears in the Talmud. Rabbi Chia saw a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. One day he was running with a shmata on his head. Usually he wore a very special, respectful hat. This time he was running around as if he was in a haste. He didn't have a chance. He didn't have the time to put on a hat. So Rabbi Chia turned to him and says, "What happened this morning?" After a while later on, when he saw him, why were you not wearing your regular hat? And the rabbi says, "Oh, I was busy taking my grandson to the cheder, to the study hall, to study Torah, and therefore I realized I was late. I got up late, and I did not want him to miss any of his studying, so I did not have the time to dress properly and put makeup, etc." So Rabbi Yoshua says to him, "Really, this is an obligation, or you do it because you love spending time with your grandchildren?" And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says to him, "It is an obligation, and not only that, it is the security of the future of myself, my family, and the Jewish people. Because when the Torah tells us remember to teach your son and your grandson. The Torah says, do not forget that I came down on Mount Sinai. In other words, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi tells Rabbi Chia, I want you to know that God tells us the reason we are receiving the Torah today, are able to study the Torah and understand and relate to the Torah, is because we care about our grandchildren and teach them Torah. If you are, and this is what we call common sense, because tradition can only pass if you care to take it to the next generation. I have Jewish tradition and you have Jewish tradition because your grandparents cared to make sure that you study and you are witnessing customs and traditions. Otherwise, it will be totally gone. The same is our obligation to our grandchildren. It is part of carrying on the Jewish tradition, the promise we gave God on Mount Sinai that we'll keep the Torah. The only way for the promise to be fulfilled is when our grandchildren study Torah. So therefore, the Rabbi Chia, the rabbi who heard it, from that day on, he wouldn't eat breakfast before he spent time with his grandchildren teaching them Torah. Everybody has their extra specific mitzvah that they are very careful about. Rabbi Chia decided that this is going to be the special mitzvah he's careful about and he performs every day. So he would make sure to study with his grandchildren every single day. He would not eat breakfast until he first spent time with his grandchildren. It speaks volume, and I think that we need to realize the reason that we love our grandchildren so much and the reason we feel so connected to them and there is so much pleasure that we derive from the grandchildren is because there is an obligation also to share with them and make sure they continue on for the next generation what we have and all the study that we gain. What happened to great grandchildren? We only know about grandchildren right now. What happened to great grandchildren? So, the beginning of the portion talks about grandsons, Ephraim and Menashe. But towards the end of the portion, we read about great grandchildren. I want to share with you, we read about Yosef. Yosef lived a very happy and enjoyable life. And the Torah concludes on chapter 50, verse 23, page 341. I'm reading it. Joseph saw children of a third generation born to Ephraim, the sons of Machir, Menashe's son, were born, and Joseph raised them on his knee. Joseph was able to see not just grandchildren, the sons of Menashe and Ephraim, but their grandchildren. In other words, he saw great grandchildren and he also saw great great grandchildren. He is able to see a fifth generation of his seeds continuing on, and that was a great blessing for Joseph. The Torah tells us that when Joseph saw the children and Menashe's, Machir's children, the son of Menashe, Yuldu al Birkei Yosef, they were raised. The translation Yuldu is they were raised or they were born on the knees of Yosef. But Yuldu also means one is that he was the moihel, or he was a sandak. He held them on his knees when the bris were performed. But some of the commentators explain, the Rebbe brings it based on Rashi, that he was their teacher. They were raised on his knees. They used to sit on his knees and you teach them Aleph Bet and the Hebrew language and the meaning of Hebrew names and Jewish holidays and customs and what to do and not to do. And whenever they had a question or a doubt, they would come to the grandfather inquiring and conversing with them. And that's why, and that's the greatest pleasure that he had. So towards the end of one who is the prime minister of Egypt, which is the superpower of the universe at the time, the Torah chooses to conclude his life by telling us that his greatest achievement was that on his knees there were frequently his great great grandchildren whom he was able to part some of his wisdom and knowledge, making sure to see that they follow and behave properly. because great grandchildren are also part of the human nature, and it is very important. And as I mentioned before, it is compared to the giving of the Torah. When a grandfather teaches his grandchildren, according to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, as he was teaching Rabbi Chia, when you teach your grandchildren, not your children, your grandchildren, you fulfill the same achievements as when God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai. And therefore, it should not be taken lightly. We should make as many opportunities as we can to find and spend time with the children, serve as a good example. And remember, we are the Zadis of the next generation. Just not long ago, we were just young people, the young children, then we raised our own families, and now we became the grandparents, the Zadis and the Bobbies of the next generation. We need to take it seriously and make sure that we do our job properly. I want to share with you few more points, two more points perhaps, that are easy to comprehend. We read that Yosef, in this beginning of the portion, we read that Yaakov is about to die. How does the Torah describe Yaakov is about to die? It says, Vayikrevu, when the days drew near for the days of Yaakov to die. The days, Yemei, Vayikrevu Yemei, Yemei is plural to Yom. Yom is one day. Yemei is days. The commentators ask, why does the Torah describe the day of passing for Yaakov in the plural? Why shouldn't it say, Vaikrav Yom Israel Lamut? As Yitzchak said to Esav before he wants to bless him, he says, Lo yadati yom moti, I don't know the day I'll pass. Usually a person passes on in the same day, on one day. Yemei is plural. Why is this plural? One of the commentators, the Malbim lived not long ago, maybe 100 years ago, explains that we know in Jewish tradition, we are told the first man that became sick is Jacob. Up to Jacob, people just died. According to tradition, every time a person would sneeze, they would fall and die. That's why anytime someone sneezes, we say Gesundheit. Do you know why we say Gesundheit when someone sneezes? Anybody knows? Because in ancient time, before Avraham Avinu, when someone would sneeze, they would die. Nobody got sick. God created us perfect, and as soon as one part is failing, the entire machine is replaced. So there was no such thing as getting sick and getting cured, and doctors, it's in medicine and vitamins, etc. So people lived, and if something went wrong with them, if they had fatigue, if they had diabetes, they just would be gone. Now we can sneeze, and when we sneeze, we move on with our life. That's why we say Gesundheit or zu gesund, or in Hebrew we say labriut, meaning it should be for health, it shouldn't kill you. Yaakov is the first person who is praying to God, asking God to get sick before he dies. Up to that point, a person who got sick, a person who died, nobody got sick. That's why we read the first time we read about someone sick is Yaakov. It says they told Yosef next page. It says, "Vayagel Yosef ine avicha chole." Your father is sick. He's about to die, and therefore we call it Yemei, the days of Yaakov to pass, because once he got sick, everybody knew that he's not going to recover. There is no cure. There is no doctors. And this is a sign from God that he has to put his house in order. And God had sent them a message or a sign to remind them that it's about to happen by giving them few days notice, advance notice, so he can say the last words and testament with his children and put his house in order. And that's why we read, Vayikrevu Yemei Israel Amut, the days of Yaakov came near to die. Again, this is one of the explanations. There are many other explanations, but this one I like because it coincides with the idea that Yaakov was the first one who got sick before he died. There's one more point I wanted to share is, after Yaakov died, They mourn him for 70 days, and then they have a march, an entire parade traveling to Israel to bury Yaakov. Yaakov is buried in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah. And then Yosef comes back, and we read about the brothers who fear that Yosef is going to take revenge for what they had done to him, selling him as a slave. And they send messengers. We are willing to be slaves to you. We are your servant. And then they come to him. We read on page 339, on chapter 50, verse 18, we read, in addition to sending messengers, his brothers also went to Joseph. They fell down in front of him and said, look, we are your slaves. And they turned to Joseph out of fear and saying to him, we are your slaves, we will do whatever you ask, expecting from us. What does Joseph do? In response, we read, Joseph is crying. As soon as they ask forgiveness, Joseph start crying. Here it is, one verse before. So they fabricated a plan and instructed messengers to go to Joseph and say, your father instructed us before his death, saying, this is what you should say to Joseph. Please, will you now forgive the wrongdoing of your brothers and the sin that they did evil things to you? So please, will you now forgive the wrongdoing of the servants of the God of your father? For even though your father died, his God is alive. So that's what a message they sent to Joseph, asking forgiveness for what they had done. When the messenger spoke to him, Joseph wept. He is crying. And one can ask, we find so many times that Joseph is crying, and each time there is a reason. Here, seemingly, there is no good reason. They come to him and remind them what they have done to him 39 years earlier or 41 years earlier, and they feel so sorry, and they fear that now father is not around, he's going to take revenge. So they offer to become servants and ask for forgiveness. Yosef, before he can answer, he starts crying. The Rebbe once explained, as Yosef later tells them, that it all came from God for a plan. As we know, he turned to them and he says, you think I am a God to control life? It was God's plan to save the universe and to bring us to Egypt, and therefore I have no hard feeling towards you. But something is difficult to understand. Why couldn't he answer immediately? Why did he cry first? The Rebbe explains that Joseph was turning to his brothers and says to them, how is it possible that you're still stuck in the past? We as Jews need to learn to look forward and move on. And whenever past should remain in the past, and we should look forward to life as is today. It's like if you are in a battlefield, and you are stationed with a machine gun to fire, and you fell asleep for 10 hours, for 7 hours after not sleeping for 10 days. Meanwhile, the foot soldiers have conquered the area and they moved a mile down, and they moved up a mile. This gunner, this man in charge of the machine gun, wakes up in the morning and he sees soldiers moving around and he starts firing on them until someone says, hey, this is friendly fire. These are our soldiers. Why are you shooting? And the guy says, I got an order. The order was to shoot on anything that moves on the border. This is the border. And they say to him, sorry, you fell asleep. In 10 hours, the border have moved a half a mile up. You should not be firing because now every bullet that you fire, and if you hit, God forbid, you're killing your own friends. Firing a gun machine when following order is appropriate in the appropriate time. But an hour later, a day later, a year later, to come up and say, okay, that's the order I received, I have to continue, it is not only inappropriate, but it can defeat the purpose. It can kill soldiers and caused the war to be lost and to the side of the gun of the man who fires the gun. The same is Joseph. Joseph, he did not understand how is it possible for Jacob's children, after they have saw that all his dreams were fulfilled, that they bow down to him twice, one with their father, one without. After they saw that he never took revenge and he loved them. After they saw that there was a purpose for saving the region, including Egypt and all the area. And 39 years later, they're still lamenting and they still remember in the past thinking that he is going to take revenge. That he could not stand, because we need to learn and we need from experience and we need to move on. We need to turn the page. How is it possible? He turned to them and say, didn't you realize it's time to turn the page? Didn't you realize it's time to move on? The Medrash tells us that when they went to Israel to bury Yaakov, Yosef was looking for the pit where they threw him in before they sold them as a slave. And they feared that the reason he went to see the pit is to, and that awakened his anger and he's being furious about what they had done. When they explained that to Yosef, Yosef said, no, I went there because there is a mitzvah to make a prayer, to say a blessing in a place where a miracle happened. So when someone faced a miracle, there is a place in town where I had a car accident, and unfortunately nothing happened to me except my car was very badly damaged. It wasn't my fault. It was some young teenager just purchased the car, got out of a car lot, and chit-chatting with a girlfriend sitting next to her, and she just, a red light came downtown and she flew straight into me in the behind me. So every time I go by there, I say, Baruch she'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Thank you, God, for performing a miracle to me in this place. And on major miracles, when lives are saved, we have to say with Hashem's name, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. I know there are some Israeli soldiers, whenever they go to Sinai, the Sinai desert, where during the Yom Kippur War and the Six-Day War, they were spared. They always stop with their families and they make that blessing with God's name. So that's why Yosef went. He says to them, I went to that pit because it was filled with snake and scorpions, and God performed a miracle and saved me. So I wanted to go and say the blessing, but nothing to do about my past. And I think for us, we need to realize it's the 21st century. We are moving into 2021. Whatever was good for 2020 is not good anymore. We need to turn the page and move on. We need to rethink our life. We need to establish our relationship. We need to find new ways of connecting. It's not the same, but instead of lamenting and trying to cleave on to the past, it ain't going to work. It's like the man with a machine gun who is firing on friendly forces because he fell asleep for 10 hours while the front had moved a half a mile up the road. And I want to conclude by wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom. May, as the portion's name, Vaychi, and he lived. We know, despite all the challenges and difficulties, as Jews, we have the source of life, which is the Torah, guiding us and helping us overcome all challenges in a great, great joy and happiness. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.